Yep, hey everyone. Dan McCarthy. I'm an associate professor of marketing at the University of Maryland, College Park, Smith School of Business.
Hi, and I'm Hank Boyd. I'm also a professor here at the University of Maryland and assistant dean for civic engagement. And so this is my colleague Dan. We like things related to sports, and who doesn't love March Madness? So are you ready?
I think so.
We're going to actually ask ourselves a couple questions, and hopefully these questions will inform the viewer out there saying, well, I had those same questions, so let's see what's going on. So Dan, I know you got expertise when it comes to AI. So here we go. We've seen people ask ChatGPT or Gemini to fill out brackets. Is a large language model actually analyzing games, or is it just parroting the consensus of sports journalists it found in its training data set?
Yes. And by that I mean it is, but it depends on what you're doing. So if you ask it, who's going to win this next game? Well, it's probably going to be basically giving you what a whole bunch of sports journalists had said from the training data. But it's not a very diagnostic question. And so I think if you were to ask it to analyze historical upset rates and all sorts of other questions that would allow you to dig in much deeper into what actually is more likely to happen in the next game, then it will absolutely perform very high quality analysis. So, the way I often will think of AI is it's like a mirror.
Okay.
And you're kind of looking into your question, not necessarily looking to yourself. In part, it might be looking into yourself, but it's really looking into your question. And if you ask it a really, really good question, then it will give you a much better answer. If you ask it a very bad question, or a less diagnostic way of asking the right question, then you are not going to get an answer that will be nearly as good. It will be parroting.
Mm-hmm. Which is a lot of folks are telling us it's the art of the prompt. So you got to make sure you ask the correct sort of prompt, or it's going to be like, well, you didn't ask me the right thing, so this is what you end up with.
Yeah, but I would say too, the prompt is really important. But I think some people, when they think of prompt engineering, they almost think of it like this mystical, pretend that you're, this really, really smart sports analyst. And maybe some of that will help a little bit. But I think the real question is, like, imagine that you were trying to do the analysis yourself. What would be a really good way of just asking the question? And again, we think about this a lot at the business school. How can we get the most out of AI? Oftentimes, if you ask it the sort of question that would lead someone who doesn't necessarily have a ton of background in the area, you give them complete instructions, it's clear, that sort of thing, you're going to get a much better answer from it. And so I don't think of it any differently with when the question is about sports versus when it's about business.
Okay, cool.
My question for you. Women's basketball stars like Juju Watkins from USC often have higher social media engagement rates than their male counterparts. So from a marketing ROI perspective, how might the women's Final Four become a more attractive buy for brands than the men's?
So we're living in the attention economy, so it's about engagement. And so we got to give credit where it's due. The women have done really well in this area. So if we notice that in platforms like TikTok and Instagram, and you're saying, okay, what's happened in terms of the engagement? 2 to 3 times in favor of the women over the men. And so this is a new trend that's taking over. And if I'm a brand, I'm thinking, wow, I'd rather have a set of engaged viewers, even if it's fewer in number, as opposed to this large group out here saying we got tremendous reach, but a lot of folks just let it wash over them. So when we look at that, we're saying, yes, women's basketball is here and it is rising, and it is a really good thing in the sense of opportunities for brands out there. And of course, I guess the guys are going to have to elevate their game in terms of those different platforms as we go forward.
It's really interesting. So I guess to the extent that if women weren't paid as much for a particular type of a deal, then it actually could be really, really attractive for the brands, because essentially they'd be able to buy a lot more engagement for the same amount of dollars.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at Caitlin Clark. I mean, that's a fine example. She's tremendous. She is definitely the GOAT. And so when she's out there doing her thing, and then you see her in ads and commercials, and I love the fact that even for March Madness, she's there with the guys as we think of Barkley, and we think of Spike Lee, and we think of course, Sam Jack, and you're sitting there going, okay, she's in the mix saying, hey, 3-point, I'm here, 3-point, I'm here. And it was really clever. And so from that standpoint, I'm sure there are lots of young girls, I'm thinking of my daughter, were like, whoa, it's Caitlin, I got to check out this ad. And so they get serious mileage out of it.
My daughter's the same way. All right, I got one more for you.
Okay.
So Wendy's is the official Dunks partner of the NCAA March Madness, and the entire campaign is organized around a single conceptual thread. Every dunk on the basketball court is a cue to dunk your fries at Wendy's. So how might this approach, focused on on-court action, benefit a brand compared to only hedging its bet on a specific player?
Great question. So we're talking basketball, guys. I love basketball. I played it in high school. Not well, but at least I could play a little bit. And what you realize is the dunk is what people talk about. Years later, you see posters, dunking. You think of Michael Jordan, right? When you think of his highlight reels, it's those dunks, you're like, how in the world did he slice through those guys and make it happen? So in my view, if we were gonna change the game, dunks would be worth 5 points, all right? Because everyone remembers the dunk. And so when we think about an NCAA game, on average, there are anywhere from 15 to 25 opportunities for a dunk. And when it happens, it's electric. And I was like, whoa, that was so awesome. Check out that dunk. So Wendy's sat down and they said, well, let's not anchor on a player. Let's anchor on a behavior. And the dunking behavior is the phenomenon. So what can you dunk in real life other than the basketball? You can dunk your fries in your Frosty. And so when you see the commercial and the stare down and my man goes for it, you're just like, wow, that's really cool. And it resonates. You get it and you're like, good stuff. And so from that standpoint, I think it's very smart. We look at human nature and we say to ourselves, yes, there can be a star, but there is this certain capriciousness, this randomness to the tournament where you could get eliminated early. You might have a bad performance, or something goes down wrong. You're human. You get upset. You get ejected. You have a flagrant foul, and suddenly we've anchored on the star, and maybe we shouldn't have done so in retrospect. But I think Wendy is going to get some great mileage out of it, and let's see if other brands sort of take that sort of cue and say, yeah, let's do this ourselves. That might be the right play.
You don't have to pay as much to a French fry as you would to some celebrity player.
Which in the end might be a good thing, so it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me throw a couple questions your way. All right, if you ask AI who will win, it usually picks the favorite. How should a user form their query or prompting strategy? Act as a high-risk contrarian gambler to help produce the most accurate upset prediction. So once again, going back to the land of prompting, if you're gonna put it together, what verbiage makes sense?
I always say, and again, this goes back to my usage of it for other purposes, ask it for the question. And oftentimes you'd be amazed, there's like the known knowns, the known unknowns, but the real kind of danger spot are the unknown unknowns. Those are the things you don't know, and you don't know that you don't know them. And so, very easy to get hoodwinked in that, quadrant of the 2x2. And so here, the analog would be, what are the things that would drive an upset? Historically, when upsets have happened, what typically came about, and is there anything systematic that I could see in advance that may make it more likely that there will be an upset in a particular game? And so obviously, one of the most basic ones would probably be that the difference in seed is not as large. But one could imagine many other factors, and that's again putting the LLM in its best possible use, because it's allowing it to be able to go in and surface the factors that would be relevant. And then once you know that, you can say, oh, wow, that's really important. So let's kind of really dive in on those factors and see how they map to the games that are coming, and then use that to identify the games where there's more likely to be an upset. So again, you wouldn't be able to get that if you didn't ask it those questions. But I do think that step number one of saying, tell me what I should know and why, it'll allow you to start asking the right questions in the first place.
Cool. Nice approach. Okay, now here's another one. A bracket is binary, win or lose. But AI thinks in probability, 65% chance to win. Does forcing an AI to make a hard choice in a bracket actually degrade the quality of its underlying statistical reasoning? Now that is a lot of stats coming your way, so what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know if it degrades the quality of its underlying statistical reasoning, but it's degrading what it's giving to you from that reasoning. So, if it believes that there's a 55% probability that, that one team is going to win over the other team, then if you were to ask it, well, who's going to win the game? Say, well, my best guess is the 55% probability team. But unless you were to explicitly ask it, it probably won't tell you that it's 55%. And so if you called out, if you tried to suss out either the probability or you try to suss out the confidence that it has in that prediction, then it's going to kind of peel back the onion a little bit further. So again, I think all of that sort of probabilistic reasoning, it would be there. And then if you ask it the question for the point estimate, well, the rational point estimate would be to go with the 55% probability team. So again, I think it also speaks to this deeper question. Ultimately, what would probably be the most useful for people to know would be what those probabilities are. You know, if I knew that it was a 90% probability, I'd probably bet very differently from if it was a 55% probability. So if you were to get those probabilities, I think you're going to be working with a much better object.
Cool. All right.
Back at ya. In light of the absence of Cinderella stories this year, how can brands pivot when those stories are not the tournament's primary narrative? Now, I would say, I think that the women's side did have a Cinderella.
Yeah, okay.
So I don't know if that's still accurate right now.
It's
but
kind of interesting. Cinderella's part of the magic, right? We think, oh, yes, it's March Madness. You have to have it. And yet the irony is, if there's no Cinderella, market the crown. And so from the standpoint of the men's team, let's see what's happened there. You got the bigs in there, right? The Big 10, the Big 12, the Big East, the SEC. And wait a minute. Dare I say it? Can I say it? ACC Duke. Yeah, I went to Duke. I said it. All right. Now, that being the case, you realize with all these big prominent sort of brands out there, there's a certain predictability. And so we can shift in some sense. We're getting away from Cinderella. We're saying here are the kind of creme de la creme, the blue bloods that are out there in the sport. And yeah, they're going to have very loyal fan bases. A lot of folks are saying, hey, I'm a big time fan. I'm totally devoted in. They're going to buy a lot of merch. And we like that. So if I want to sell merch, if I want to say from a brand standpoint of what's going to be consistent, and I don't have to be worried like, gosh, if we anchor on a Cinderella, they might be here, but they could disappear by the time we get to the Elite Eight. So it's nice to know you're going to have somebody in that Final Four, somebody who's probably going to be crowned champion. So we go with the crown.
it's been a very chalky bracket.
Yeah. So if we look at this a little bit more, is the ultimate goal of AI in March Madness to replace the human picker, or is it better to use as a supplemental tool that highlights statistical anomalies for the user then to decide on? So is it a tool or is it trying to replace us?
Yeah, you probably know my answer if you follow any of my stuff, but I am very squarely in the second camp that there's been a lot of really good work that's done that shows the ability of AI to help people do more. It's a multiplicative factor. And what I mean by that is if you have a lot of base knowledge in an area and then you ask it questions, you kind of know what you're looking for. You know the right questions to ask. You know what the factors are. And so you'll be able to get that much more than if you didn't have that knowledge and you're just saying, tell me who's going to win. So if you start with no knowledge,
right.
0 times any number is still 0, But if you start with a lot of knowledge, then suddenly,
right.
Boom, you can do so much more. And so I think what that tends to lead to is you're going to get the most of it when you use it as a tool. And the people who are really, really good, they'll be able to get that much more out of it if they both have the foundational knowledge and they have the ability to use the tool very well. Now, I don't know if it's highlighting statistical anomalies. I think it can allow for just really good, rigorous analysis, and it can allow you to do all that way faster. Maybe you could have done that stuff by hand, but now you can just say, do it for me, and it's going to say, yeah, sure, I'll do it.
Which is pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, but yeah, I think the broader point is true. That in general, it's a tool,
right?
And I think it will replace a lot of what would have otherwise been done by a human. But I think it's still a human who's going to be benefiting from that. And I think oftentimes it's going to be the very best people who are going to get the most out of it.
Okay, that makes sense. So be strategic and let it do most of the donkey work. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, and if you don't, if you're kind of like me, and I don't know as much as you about the March Madness, then I'll probably want to just piggyback off you.
Oh, okay. Well,
so
that works.
Or we can team up, and I can be like,
Yeah.
here's how we can kind of do the ultimate 1-2 punch.
I like it.
Open Doors data shows NIL earnings spiked 92% in March. Is this signaling that brands prefer one-month wonders who go viral in the Sweet 16? Or are they pivoting toward multi-year deals with underclassmen to build long-term equity?
Wow. Okay, that's a great question. I'd say both phenomena are happening. So when we look at this, we say to ourselves, March has become a liquidity event. So if I'm a player and I have the magic and my team goes deep in that tournament, you could really see things take off in terms of NIL. Like I'm looking at my following base might go from 50% up to 200% because, hey, you're the emerging rising star and everyone wants to get on the bandwagon. So I think of some of the breakout stars we're seeing like Darius Akoff, who was with Arkansas. Amazing guard, okay? And when that game against High Point, when they were up against Rob Martin, I got to give respect to Rob, it was back and forth, back and forth. And if you love basketball, you were like, wow, we're really following these guys. And so when you start thinking about it, you're saying to yourself, this is really cool that we can sort of build this thing out in the short term. But in the long term, you got to say, okay, if I've got juniors and seniors, they're the ones that are going to give me the return on investment. If I've got freshmen and sophomores, I'm starting thinking, well, down the line, maybe future equity is here. So we can have both. In the short term, you can get the spike, and in the long run, you can sort of build in that return on investment from your stars that have established themselves. So I would say that, yeah, NIL rights are here, and it didn't take long, right? A couple of years ago, everyone's like, well, dude, I don't have NIL. You got NIL? I don't have NIL. And suddenly now, in a short span of time, we're talking about multi-million dollars in terms of that space, that ecosystem. Also, the other thing that's intriguing is it seems like all of it's going toward the winners, right? Because when I talk to some colleagues and they go, well, gee, I hear about these NIL things going on. What's the story? 70% of these NIL contracts are less than $1,000. So we're talking about a very small percentage of people that are killing it where they're like, yeah, I'm the multimillionaire. I've got the $6, $7 figure that's going on in terms of my NIL deal. So when we look at this, we're saying, yeah, there's a lot going on in the space, early days. We've got a lot to learn, and you can argument that we're experimenting since it is early days. And so we're trying to figure out how best to take advantage of saying, when do you shine? And March, I think going forward, like I said, will be the liquidity event. That's the time to do it.
And then maybe to the earlier question, tie it up with the men versus the women. Could there be more ROI for women than men? I don't know how those trends have been for women versus men.
I think we're going to start to see indices telling us that yes, women, as the engagement rises and they get the following that's there, then yeah, we're going to see that they're selling more, that brands are coming their way saying, yeah, we want you to be part of what we represent. You could be our brand ambassador going forward. And so it's kind of intriguing that what's happened over time when we think of whether it be a battle between men and women's in terms of you got March Madness for women, March Madness for men, they're now separate sort of creatures. And that I think is a good thing. And so you can definitely see that that's starting to happen. And I think that's going to be dividends down the line in terms of NIL deals. And of course, it seems it's going to easily trumpet in terms of the amount of money that women make, as you pointed out earlier, in terms of the salaries they're getting from the WNBA. And in time, I'd like to see parity. Let us hope.
Makes sense.
Yeah. All right, so I've got a question for you. How does the gambler's fallacy manifest in March Madness? And do bettors tend to overcorrect by betting on a 12 seed just because they saw a different 12 seed win earlier that day? So we're talking about human behavior, kind of scary. So what do you think?
Can happen. Can happen. So yeah, I think it's just kind of part of the human condition that we observe history and we try to create some story around it to kind of connect the dots. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the dots should be connected, but oftentimes the dots should not be connected. You flip a coin, you flip it again, you flip it a third time, those are all independent draws, they're unrelated to one another. And even if you had 50 coin flips and they all came up heads, you were just exceedingly lucky. I mean, if that was truly, you knew it was just a typical coin, then the next draw is equally likely to be heads or tails. And I think the same is true for these games. And I think in this case, one thing that we've talked about already is that it's been really, really chalky for the men. Right. A lot of the highly seeded teams, they're the ones who are winning.
Right.
And so on the one side, you could create a story, well, maybe that means it's more likely to continue. Maybe other people would say, well, that means that the lower seeded people from the teams that remain were due for an upset. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so they'll actually bet even more on the underdog because they believe we're due. And it's like, well, I don't know. If those are just coin flips,
Right.
I'm not sure that I would change how I would do my analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think that's just one of those things that is just part of the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
Would an AI be subject to that? I don't know. But I would say that that could be an area where to be able to ground yourself in sound analysis, I think it can help be like a pseudo armor that protects you against that sort of fallacy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And can I add one last thing? Okay, it's intriguing there's talk out there saying, well, NIL has ruined the game for college sports. And I totally disagree with that. And here's where I'm coming from. We have market forces that were there always. And so it's just correcting for what should have been there in the beginning. If we look at the nature of this game, how it's evolved over time, it's about attention, people spending money, and millions of dollars generated. And we think about the old times when the coaches made millions of dollars, the players didn't get anything out of the deal. That was wrong. You had labor, people actually in the arena getting nothing for the fruits of their labor. And so now, with these market forces coming in, this is as it should be. So I'll go on record saying that yes, NIL is a good thing, it's the right thing, and it's about time.